It started with a job listing that shouldn't have existed. Graveyard nursery seeks groundskeeper. Must start immediately. Night shifts only. No questions. Most people wouldn't even read that twice. But I did. Then again, most people didn't owe rent to a landlord who knocked with a baseball bat. I sent a one-word reply. Interested. 3 minutes later I received an address. No name. No instructions. Just a location in a remote part of town I'd never heard of, Birch Hollow. The air shifted when I opened the message, like something cold had crept into the room and taken a seat right behind me. The drive to Birch Hollow felt like something out of a dream. Long stretches of empty road that seemed to bend in impossible ways, thick fog that clung to the windshield like a living thing, and a feeling in my chest that grew heavier with every mile. The nursery appeared out of nowhere. 1 second I was surrounded by trees. The next, rows upon rows of potted plants behind a rusted wrought iron fence. An old wooden sign swung above the entrance reading, Ashroot Nursery, 1899. It was nearly midnight, yet the greenhouse lights were on. There was no welcome, no gatekeeper. Just a narrow path leading to a small building nestled between gravestones. Real gravestones. Hundreds of them. Pause. Was this really a graveyard nursery? As I stepped through the gate, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounded too loud, too deliberate, like something wanted to hear me coming. I made it to the main greenhouse, and as I reached for the door, it swung open on its own. The scent of damp earth and rotting petals filled my nose. Inside, rows of plants sat in pots lined with strange symbols. Circles, eyes, jagged runes that looked carved with a blade instead of etched with a tool. And then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched sound. Not wind. Not insects. A whispering. Layered voices. Some crying, others murmuring words I couldn't understand. Came from the plants. I stood frozen, my hand still on the doorframe. The air buzzed with energy, the kind that makes your skin itch and your heartbeat stutter. And then a voice behind me said, "You're late." Turn quickly. A woman stood there, tall, thin, with long white hair and eyes too dark for the light. She wore gardening gloves smeared with soil and something darker. She smiled without warmth. "Come. I'll show you the rules." She led me along a stone path toward the back of the greenhouse, past planter boxes arranged like coffins, each labeled with names instead of plant types. Agnes Bell, 1903. Thomas Crick, 1912. Eliza Corr, 1887. Were these people buried here beneath the plants? "The nursery feeds off memory," the woman said without turning. "That's why we don't allow pruning after dark. Or watering during a scream." "Stop. Did you say scream?" She paused at a row of tall vines wrapped around iron trellises. "They scream when they remember something terrible. The roots tap into pain. The stronger the memory, the louder they cry." She faced me again. "And the most dangerous ones. The ones buried too deep to forget. We call those the redlings. If you hear them wailing, don't look at them. Don't even listen too hard." Chill ran through me. "And one more thing," she added, stepping closer. "If the plants stop screaming, run. It means they're listening." I didn't go back the next night because I was brave. I went because I had nowhere else to go. The caretaker's hut was cold, the kind of cold that clings to your spine and makes your teeth hurt. The lights flickered whenever I passed by the greenhouse, but they never went out completely. Like the nursery itself didn't want to be forgotten. Or maybe it didn't want me to forget it. Around midnight, I stepped into the main greenhouse. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of moss and something sour, like burnt sugar and rotting meat. The plants were restless. The vines twitched as I passed, curling just slightly toward my movement. The flowers, those grotesque too bright blooms with thick, veined petals, trembled even though there was no wind. And then I heard it again. Scream. Not distant. Not muffled. But clear and cutting, like a woman shrieking in agony just inches from my ear. I dropped the watering can and staggered backward, heart racing. The sound had come from a low patch of black lilies growing in a stone trough labeled, "Eat Trask, 1911. I stared at them wide-eyed. They didn't move. Not at first. But then their petals turned slowly upward, as if they were craning their heads to look at me. Another scream, louder this time. Piercing. And I saw it. Just for a moment, in the reflection of the greenhouse glass behind them. An image that couldn't possibly be real. A man buried alive. Dirt pouring into his mouth as his fingers clawed at a wooden lid. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, pleading. His mouth open in an eternal, silent scream. Then it was gone. I backed away, chest heaving. But behind me, the vines had crept closer. I turned and saw the redlings, the ones the woman warned me about, shifting on their trellises, their long tendrils twitching like antennae sensing fear. That's when I heard footsteps. Not soft, careful ones. Heavy, dragging. Something was walking through the greenhouse. I crouched behind a rack of potted roses with crimson thorns as thick as fingers. Peering through the leaves, I saw it. A shape, tall and hunched, moving slowly down the aisle. Its skin looked like bark, cracked and peeling, and from its back sprouted blackened branches. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't human. The thing stopped beside the lilies, the ones that screamed, and reached down to stroke them with a wooden hand. The screaming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I stayed frozen until the shape turned and slithered through the back wall like it had never been solid to begin with. When I finally returned to the caretaker's hut, I found a note pinned to the door with a gardening knife. You made it through your first scream. Don't let them choose you next. And beneath it, my name written in soil. Soil that was still wet. Still warm. I told myself I imagined the note. The shape. The scream. But when I woke up the next evening, my boots were still caked with black soil, and the name Elijah was scratched into the condensation on the hut's window. I never told anyone here my name. The nursery looked quieter tonight. Too quiet. The plants didn't sway. The air was still. Even the usual low, mournful hum had vanished. I should have felt relief, but the silence pressed on my chest like a weight. Every step toward the greenhouse felt like moving deeper into something alive and waiting. The old woman was there this time, kneeling beside a row of rust-colored ivy. You heard them, she said without looking up. They remember you now. What does that mean? I asked, my voice shaking. She finally stood, wiping her dirt-stained gloves on her apron. You looked when they screamed. That's how they find you. I swallowed hard. Who? She tilted her head toward the redlings. The ones that were planted wrong. Buried with rage instead of peace. They screamed the loudest, because they never wanted to die. I wanted to leave. My legs didn't move. I made a mistake, I whispered. She looked at me then, really looked. Her pupils were too small. Almost non-existent. We all did, she said. That's why we're still here. That night, I locked the greenhouse tighter than usual. But locks don't matter much when the thing watching you isn't bound by doors or walls. The first sign was a scraping, soft, rhythmic, against the window of the hut. I peered out, flashlight in hand. Nothing. Then came the thud on the roof. A slow, dragging sound, like fingers made of bark and bone were crawling across the shingles. I held my breath. And then, I heard the whisper. Elijah! My name, spoken in a voice like creaking branches. I grabbed my coat and ran out into the night, toward the greenhouse, the only place I'd seen it before. Maybe if I faced it, whatever it was, it would stop. But when I got there, the greenhouse was already open. Lights off. The plants were still, as if holding their breath. And then one of the redlings moved. Its vine rose slowly, curling toward me like a hand beckoning. I turned to leave, but froze. In the reflection of the glass behind me stood the shape again. Taller this time, its limbs dragging, its wooden face twisted into something like a grin. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It only pointed toward the gravestone beds. And on the newest stone, freshly carved, was my name. Elijah Grain. Born. 1995. Died soon. I didn't sleep. How could I? I sat on the edge of my cot in the caretaker's hut. The reflection of my name etched in my mind like it had been carved into my skull instead of stone. Born 1995. Died soon. The word soon had more weight than any date ever could. That night I returned to the greenhouse, not to work but to demand answers. The woman was already there, pruning a wall of black-petaled vines. She didn't flinch when I walked in, but her hands slowed their motion, as though expecting something. "I saw my name," I said. She nodded without surprise. "Then it's begun. What is this place?" I demanded. "This isn't a nursery. This is a cemetery," she finished. "Yes, of course, but not for the living. This is where the restless are grown. Federal kept from spreading." I stared at her, not comprehending. She sighed and for the first time looked tired. When someone dies with unfinished hatred, with a scream trapped in their soul, they don't always rest. The scream echoes. "We bury them here, but not in caskets." She walked to a far section of the greenhouse I hadn't been allowed into before. With a reluctant wave, she unlatched the gate. Inside were twisted rows of shriveled saplings. Each one was staked to the ground with iron rods, their roots bound in black cloth and soaked in blood-colored water. "These aren't plants," she whispered. "They're people." Backed away. "You're insane." "No. I'm just one of the few left who still keeps them quiet." The screamers, she called them, were born of soil seeded with rage. The dead had been planted instead of buried. Some by accident, some by curse, some by design. "That's why you're here," she added. "They chose you." "No," I said. "I didn't choose them." She pointed to the vines, the redlings. "They saw something in you. Something unfinished." I thought about my past. My father, buried in an unmarked grave after what he did. The resentment I held. The dreams. The rage. She saw the truth in my face. "It's not always about what you did," she said. "Sometimes it's about what you're carrying. Pain is fertile ground, and they feed on it." That's when we heard the scream again. This one wasn't coming from a specific patch of flowers. It echoed from every corner of the greenhouse at once, deep, distorted, vibrating the glass panes until they cracked. The scream was calling for me. The woman grabbed my arm. "There's still a way to stop it. But you have to bury what it wants." "What does it want?" Yes. Her eyes were empty now. Closure. Or death. Outside, the soil began to pulse. The vines started to rise. And from the far side of the nursery, a grave began to open, not digging from the top down, but from the inside out. The earth trembled beneath my feet, like the nursery itself was waking up. I ran to the back of the greenhouse, heart pounding in my ears. The woman's grip tightened on my wrist, pulling me towards the corner where the fresh grave was. The soil was shifting, as if something from beneath was trying to break free. "The roots," she gasped. "They're trying to take you." The redlings writhed, their thick, blood-tinged tendrils rising into the air like serpents ready to strike. The vines that had been quiet for days now swayed with unnatural hunger, slithering towards me. I could hear whispers, voices entwined with the wind, calling my name. "Elijah! Elijah! Come closer! Run!" The woman screamed, but it was too late. I was already surrounded. One of the vines wrapped around my ankle, pulling me to the ground. I gasped, feeling the damp, cold pressure tightening like a vice. I struggled, kicking at the thick, fleshy tendrils, but they held firm. My chest tightened with panic as the air grew thick with the smell of earth and rot. The vines seemed to pulse with a dark life of their own, and in the distance, the grave trembled again. Through the chaos I saw it. Face. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was a twisted visage of bark and bone, a grimace of anger frozen in time. Its eyes were hollow black pits, but they stared directly at me, unblinking. I realized then that it was watching me on purpose. The grave had been calling for me all along. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered, struggling against the roots. The woman was nowhere to be seen. It was just me and the screaming nursery. The thing from the grave slowly rose, its body made of dead wood and rusted iron, a grotesque mockery of life. Its arms stretched out toward me, and for the first time I understood. This wasn't just a nursery. It was a prison. It was a feeding ground. I watched in horror as the plant creature pulled itself free from its grave. Had been there for so long, decades, maybe centuries. And now it was free. But the roots, they weren't just reaching for me. They were reaching for the woman. She appeared at the edge of the greenhouse, her hands trembling as she raised them to the sky. The plants stopped their advance. "Don't come any closer," she cried. But it was too late. The vines recoiled like snakes and struck. I saw her face twist in pain as the redlings wrapped around her body, squeezing tighter and tighter. A terrible scream echoed through the greenhouse, the sound of a woman being swallowed by the earth itself. The plants drank her cry, soaking it in, feeding off her anguish. The roots pulled her into the soil, vanishing beneath the grave like it had been waiting all along. I lay there, gasping for breath, still held by the vines. And I realized with a sickening certainty that this wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about the woman. This place, this graveyard nursery, was a cycle. A loop of death and rebirth, each soul feeding the next, each scream a seed for something darker. And as I lay on the cold ground, watching the plants retreat back into their shadows, I knew that the curse had passed to me. The grave was still open. The roots were still hungry. And soon there would be a new name on the stone.